Tutors, mentors, and the city with your host.com.
The City Tutors presents
Tutors, mentors, and the city
with your host.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kevin.com Brown, and welcome to Tutors, Mentors, and the City. And like I always do, we're going to jump right in. Please help me in welcoming our guest, Dr. Tom Rowlands-Rees. Give it up for him, everybody. Yay! Tom, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. Thank you for joining me. I know you're a very busy person. I could just tell by the backdrop of the ambiance of your of your location that you're a very important man.
Maybe not as important as I'd like to be, but you know, we all are trying to get further in life, you know.
Yes, yes. So I'm going to jump right in with my typical first question. Tom Rowlands-Rees, who are you?
Oh, that's a very deep question.
See, you didn't expect that.
No. So mine's Tom Rowlands-Rees.
Rowlands, plural.
Yeah, I don't really mind too much either way.
Okay.
So yeah, Tom Rowlands-Rees. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm from the UK. Yes. 41 years old. I've been living in the US a couple of years. My work with Bloomberg took me here. I work for a part of Bloomberg where we do analysis on the clean energy industry. The whole journey of decarbonization that we are on. As the human race, we do a lot of the analysis of the business decisions that have to go into that. And so, yeah, I can talk plenty about my job, but that's what I do. And I'm based in New York. In previous iterations of my life, I was a scientist for a period. I was a filmmaker for a period. I was even a dancer at one point. I've done sorts of different things. I don't know if you do any research on your people. You might have dug out other things, but those are the things I like to think of the things that define me the most.
Well, I tell you, to answer that last question, no, I do absolutely no research on
okay.
on my guests. I make sure that the structure of these interviews in the warped world we live in, I'm sort of a celebrity, right? I was on a national TV show. I'm a stand-up comedian. Won some awards in television. So people know me publicly, but they don't necessarily know my guests. So with that dynamic, I try to get to know the guests the same way the viewers do. So The things that I'm asking from their perspective, right? The guy that doesn't know you. Now, you said a couple of things that we're going to unpack, right? I'm going to circle back to that dancer part, right? Because we're going to have to, we're going to dig into that. But you said something else before that. You work for Bloomberg. He was our mayor. And a lot of us knew Bloomberg as a very wealthy man, and we know him as Mayor Bloomberg. But we didn't necessarily know what his company did. So when you mention that, what does Bloomberg do? What does the company do? Not the man, the company.
Sure. I mean, the company, it started life as a platform for providing data, specifically for the finance industry, so that they could make informed decisions. And it was sort of quite innovative in how it would bring that using, and this was in the early days of networks, but using the internet to do that. That was a successful business. And so then that grew substantially. And so then as that product started to grow, it became more than just data. So a news service was added to that to complement that data. First and foremost, reporting on business, getting up-to-date news on everything going on in the world in business. And then from there, everything has expanded. So that, that there's now a TV channel as well. Bloomberg is a major news network. Still more and more data being added. And there's all sorts of different strands to the business, such as the one I'm in that is focused specifically on the energy transition. There's also a philanthropies part of the company that is really focused on leveraging the company's wealth to positively impact the world, and that supports all sorts of different things like decarbonization, providing opportunities across different communities around the world. I can't list them all. It's so multifaceted. So it's a huge organization with many different faces. And yeah, it's more than just what one person does. But yes, he was mayor of New York.
Yes, and that's what the layman knows of him. But I'm gonna circle around now. All right. So let's go back if you don't mind. Let's go way back. So you're from the UK. Where in the UK were you born?
So I was born on the South Coast in a little town called Fareham. And then when people ask me the question, where am I from? My family moved around a lot. So in UK terms, I just say I'm generically Southern. And prior to moving to New York, I lived in London for 10 years, and that's the longest I ever lived in one place. So although I wasn't born in London, I didn't spend my childhood in London, I kind of consider myself a Londoner. I have a very deep love for London. So if you had to say where I'm from in a single word, I'd say I'm from London. Okay,
now I'm interviewing you with American sensibilities, U.S. sensibilities, and I'm a stand-up comic. So what I do with my interviews is I basically, you know how if you've been to a comedy show before, the comedian says, "Hey, how you doing? What's your name?" And then that's the line of questioning. We dig into that. So that's the angle I use when I do my interviews. So for clarity, when you say Southern to someone from the
else in the US, yeah.
Right. Well, you say Southern to someone from the U.S., it means something else. It means South Carolina. It means Tennessee. It means Mississippi. It means a Southern drawl and cows and farming. That's what it means in American terms. What does it mean in UK terms?
In UK terms, I mean, the UK has a lot of regional variation for such a small island. So you've got Scotland, England, Wales, which already in that one island are distinct national identities. And then within England, which is where I'm from, there's a north-south divide.
Okay.
The north is a lot of the industrial heartlands of England. And there's multiple northern accents, but there is, in terms of people's accents and cultural sensibilities, that's the big divide, north and south. South was a combination of London. London is in the south and is sort of a very important defining part of its identity, and a lot of, I would say, more rural regions. There is a little bit of friction between those two parts of England. The south has historically been where there's been more power and wealth. The north feels that, they have been somewhat exploited by the south sometimes. But I think we're all friends in the UK, more or less. So, these are more like some of the things that come up when you're having a few drinks and throwing banter, as we call it. Do you use the word banter in the US?
We do.
Yeah, these are the sorts of things that you would form part of banter when you're talking north and south in England.
Okay. And also, as a comedian, in our immediate observation, when someone says they move around a lot, right? They didn't live anywhere long. We think military family. We think homeless group home. We think, gypsy. So from a comedic perspective, those are the things that a comedian might say. Oh, you moved around a lot. Were you a band of gypsies? But what did you mean when you say we moved around a lot?
Actually, I mean, my family moved abroad. When I was about 7 years old, my dad's work took him to what was then called Zaire, is now Democratic Republic of Congo.
Congo, yes.
And we lived in Kinshasa. I went to school in Kinshasa for a couple of years. We then moved on to Nigeria. Then we came back to England. it was then around the time the Berlin Wall fell, and so it was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. His work took him to Uzbekistan. So we moved around a lot, is what I would say. And so I spent a little bit of time in different countries, exposed to different cultures, which is why I kind of felt back in England, there was no particular place was my hometown. I always say if I'm in the south of England, I'm generally at home, I fit in, but there's never a town I could just say, I could just point to. If someone asked me directions, I'd always be like, I don't know, I'm not from here. Until I settled in London.
Okay, so with that, it sounds like I'm a master's candidate at City College, and I recently took a class about the peoples of Africa. So I learned some things about Africa and learned that there are 50 some odd countries, and all of them distinct in their government and their sensibilities. So for you to move around so much like that, those were either corporate moves or political moves, like ambassadorships. Was it something like that? What was it like?
I mean, yeah, it was corporate moves. I mean, my dad, being completely frank with you, worked for a cigarette company. Not everyone's cup of tea. I appreciate that. But yeah, it was a corporate existence. I'm not gonna. And I was just a little kid, so I was somewhat living in what you would call an expat bubble. But you would still. I remember, moving to Kinshasa, and my preconception going there is that it would be just like the UK except with hotter weather, and you realize because I didn't know anything different, and then you're in somewhere where things are just so different, and a lot of the things that I mean, the DRC as a country has had all sorts of struggles. I never really understood it as what I was seeing. You'd look at the road, would be unkempt, the holes. I just thought that's what people like here. I never saw it as like a negative thing. I was just like, I thought it was cool. You'd go along in the car and it'd be bumpy, and like you'd just be like, yeah. And it's only like when you're older and you can reflect back that what you're actually seeing was a country that was in a very different state to the one you just come from.
Right. Okay. So, with that, so you said you went to school in the DRC?
Yeah.
So is there a distinction there? Like in America, we have public school, we have private school. Does that distinction exist over there?
I went to a school that was actually run by British missionaries.
Okay.
My family's not actually religious, but it was the only English-speaking school in the city. So I went there for a couple of years, but it wasn't really what, like I say, it was a missionary school. My family's not religious at all. So I was sent back to the UK at the age of 8, and I went to boarding school. So from the ages of 8 to 18, I was at a couple of different boarding schools in the UK. Okay,
so that sounds like wealth. Did you grow up in wealth?
No, I didn't really grow up in wealth. I mean, it's really interesting that I would say I didn't grow up in it, but my family's position, like our level of wealth increased over the course of this time, because I think that when I was born, I didn't have, where we were at that time, I never had new clothes or anything like that. And my parents wouldn't have ever dreamed that they would be able to take me to boarding school. But it's kind of like part of the deal. You agree that you're going to go somewhere that is kind of considered challenging, maybe you're not going to have the nicest lifestyle. And the deal is we'll pay for your kids to go to boarding school.
Okay.
So that was kind of the, I wasn't saying it directly. My parents weren't very thrilled at the level of education in the missionary school I was at.
Right.
I had been in a typical state school in the UK before then. And so it was sort of like, well, either we come back to the UK and, my dad does a different job, or something has to be done about our kids' education. And so that was kind of the deal, is that they paid for me to go to boarding school.
Right. Now that kind of upbringing sounds challenging. Did you find it challenging? Was it a struggle moving from place to place like that for a young man?
No, I mean, I think, I mean, you know, I won't gloss over the fact that I think I had a really privileged upbringing. I mean, you know, I went to really good schools, and it's a privilege as well to get to see different countries and cultures and get that kind of exposure. And of course, there's things there are moments that are tough. You know, it wasn't easy at 8 years old going and living in an institution, basically. And, you know, it was far from luxurious, but I have been around long enough and met enough people to know that, you know, when you average everything out, I had it very good. You know, and I although it was tough and, you know, emotionally being away from my parents was difficult, you know, as a kid, you can get used to things. And it was for a good reason I was away from them. And there was something, you know, I was getting something out of it that would equip me well in later life. So I don't have any, yeah, I think that it would be incredibly ungrateful to say I had it tough. I definitely didn't.
Did you grow up with siblings?
Yeah, I've got one older brother.
Okay. So when y'all were making the journey, what's the difference in age?
He's 2 years older than me. So
it was like when you went to a school, both of y'all would be at the same school, or
yeah,
was there
exactly.
a great divide? Okay. So it was you and your buddy. Was it how difficult was it, like making friends as a young man and then having to leave those little friends? Do you have any friends from back then?
I can actually think of one guy who I'm still tentatively in touch with, who was from the school I was at in the UK before my parents left to go abroad. You know, then I was at a school for 5 years where we were at a school and we we're all like living together. So, you know, those people who you make friends, the friends you make there, you'll be friends with them for life, you know, irrespective of whatever happens next. Then I was at another boarding school from the age of 13 to 18. Again, we're all living together literally in a room together, as well as going to school. So of course, those people are going to be close friends the rest of my life. It's not necessarily that I speak to those people every day, because I've, you know, subsequently go through other experiences in life, you make other friends. But I'm still in touch. And, you know, the nice thing is we live in the era of social media, for better or worse. The one thing it means is, unless you really want to lose touch with people, you don't lose touch with people, because you can just look them up.
Right. Okay. So you turn 18 and it's time to go to college.
Yeah.
What do you do? Where do you go?
So I went to study in Oxford, in the UK, and I studied physics.
Now, when you say in Oxford, you mean in the town of Oxford or at the school, the University of Oxford?
One and the same thing. Both. It was
really?
the University of Oxford, yeah.
So the school is the town. The school is the place is all about the university.
Yeah, I mean, there is a town like Oxford is a town that's bigger than just the university. I mean, it used to have a big automotive industry there. There's actually another university called Oxford Brookes there. So yeah, I was at Oxford University. And that is in the town of Oxford.
Now, as a guy that grew up in America, all I know about Oxford is what I've seen in movies, right?
Yeah.
Ivy League.
Yeah, it's our equivalent to the Ivy League. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So you had to be brilliant to get into Oxford. Were you brilliant?
I wouldn't say. I don't believe in saying certain people are brilliant. Full stop. I think that a feature of my life and career is sometimes having good fortune and capitalizing on it. So I was hardworking at school, and I happened to, for all the reasons you just outlined, went to a good school. And you put those ingredients together, you should be able to get into good universities. So I applied myself to the opportunity that came my way. I don't think I was brilliant. I just did my best. It's also one of the things in a culture in a place like Oxford, I'm sure it's the same in a lot of the Ivy Leagues, you have a lot of 18-year-olds who haven't necessarily seen that much of the world, who think they're brilliant because they're always told these places are full of brilliant people. And it's only when you like move on and get outside of your bubble, you kind of realize that you meet lots of brilliant people who never got that opportunity. So that's why I hesitate to call myself brilliant. I just know too many smart people who didn't get to go to a school like that. So I would just say I was lucky to be at a good school, and I definitely then worked hard as well. Those two ingredients meant that I was able to do that.
And what did you major in Oxford?
Physics.
Physics. Okay. And how far did you go? What you got your, so it's the same structure, bachelor's degree. Did you go for an advanced degree after that?
So yeah, I stayed in Oxford for about 8 years. I really liked it, and I went and did a PhD. So I did a bachelor's, master's, PhD all the way through. And it's interesting, actually. I said about London, it's the longest I ever lived in one place, so it's kind of like home. I think part of the reason I stayed at one university so long is that was like the same thing. It was the first time I ever really got to be in a place where if someone asked me directions, I knew the answer. And I found physics fascinating, and getting the opportunity to work in research was really something I really feel lucky to have got to do.
Okay, so getting a PhD in physics, what did that prepare you to do?
I think one of the things that I learned from doing a PhD is you learn how to teach yourself things. A lot of our education, and I think it's a good thing, our education, you're always learning from someone who knows more than you, and they've thought about how to teach you. They've kind of almost created the obstacle course in front of you and then, you have to knock down the hurdles or complete the tasks, and then you learn. And when you get to PhD and you're working in research, like, because you're at a cutting edge, there's not that structure for you. And so it's not that you have to necessarily be brilliant. You have to be like bloody minded and like just very determined. When you come up against something you don't understand, figure it out. And it's not always, I was working in experimental physics, so we'd be in a lab, there'd be lots of equipment. It wouldn't necessarily be about like difficult physical principles. It would be things like the computer's busted again, because, we're putting it in an environment where there's like high voltage discharges. So the computer's always busted. So it was kind of like, all right, we could like wait for IT to come and fix this and it will slow everything down. Or we can just like go on Google, start figuring out as much as we can to figure out how, when this computer breaks, we can fix it ourselves. And I think like doing a PhD was like, I don't think there was anything like some profound knowledge of the universe I got. What I got was this instinct of when you solve a problem, when you come across a problem, like it's not like, oh, now we stop. It's more like, all right, how do we solve this problem? And we don't know how to solve it. Okay, how do we learn how to solve this problem? And I don't know how I'd have done in an era before Google. Honestly, I know people did PhDs before Google existed. I used Google a lot for solving different problems during my PhD. It really helps.
So you're a very young man right now. You look like you appear to be a young man. How old were you when you got your PhD? I
was 20. Let me just think. I was 27.
Now that's super impressive. What is a 27-year-old? Now you finished, you have your terminal degree. It's time to leave Oxford. Where do you go? How do you get there?
So actually, when I finished my PhD, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I really enjoyed being in research, but I also knew that it wasn't for me. I looked at my supervisor. I really respected my supervisor. He was like a really cool guy, and he's like a professor in Oxford, which is this like prestigious university in the UK. And I was like, if I stay in this field, like the very best I can hope for is his life, but like probably I won't even get there. And everything else is considerably less cool. And I was like, it's not good enough, like in terms of, it's not exciting enough for me. So I knew I wanted to do something different. And so I kind of came into the world of work. I needed a job, just, to pay the bills. And but I also, at the same time, I had developed this sideline in filmmaking. So I had these dreams of being a filmmaker, but then I went and got a job because I was like, well, I can't pay my bills straight away. So I'll kind of keep hustling on the side with filmmaking, and I'll get a job, that uses the education that I've just worked so hard to get. One thing I should say is this was at a time where, thankfully, was before tuition fees were really introduced in the UK in a big way. So I didn't have a ton of student debt the way that someone in the US after the similar amount of time at university would have, because the government covered it all. They also funded my PhD. So I was in a very lucky position, because it might sound strange where I'm like, yeah, I did all this education. Then I was like, what do I want to do with my life? So I had this like divide in front of me: filmmaking or carrying on with the work. And for a long time, I did both. So I got myself a job at a company called New Energy Finance that did analysis on the world of clean energy, wind and solar, and the sort of the decarbonization of the economy. And that, in my view, was how I was going to pay the bills while I side hustled on the film front.
Now, I want to circle back to this for a second. 27 years old, completed your PhD, and you still didn't know what you wanted to do with your life. That statement is so remarkable to young people, because when you're coming from the young perspective, you look at elders and just assume they have it all figured out, that there's no crossroads, that there's no pivot points, that there's no confusion. And just the fact that you said, a graduate of the world-renowned Oxford University, a PhD, and it's like, it's in the movies, that sounds like, and he lived happily ever after. That's how the movie ends, right? But to be at that point, and then you still now thinking about going into filmmaking, that's hilarious and interesting at the same time.
I mean, if I could give people, and we'll talk about it a bit more, if I could give people like one advice of my career, I feel like I'm very lucky. I've had the chance to do some really cool things. And I've always had a bit of a plan, but my plan has always had a lot of, what if and if maybe. And I think that more important than having a plan, you should be open to possibilities and open to opportunities. Because sometimes if you overplan, you might miss the amazing opportunity to like do something completely different you never possibly planned for. And that would be sad. There was never a moment where I suddenly decided, right, this is what I'm doing. I now have carried on down a particular path with the clean energy analysis, but there was never a moment where I set out a master plan for myself. I always was pushing forward. I was always working hard at what I did. But I think that there was one thing I did badly, I didn't plan well, but there's one thing I did do well, was I kept my eyes open and jumped on various possibilities that came my way.
Now that is a great observation. That's a great piece of advice for young people to keep in mind when they're going through their journey. I laugh to her all the time. She's 28 years old, maybe 29, I forget. But she calls me for advice. And my first response is usually, girl, I don't know. That's typically my first response. And then after I laugh and she says, come on, Dad, then I'll say, you know what? I'm not going to tell you what you should do, but I'll tell you what I would do. Right?
I think that's good advice.
Yeah. Now with that, she just can't believe, with her mother and her father, we both had pretty successful careers, but young people just can't believe that elders don't know the answer, right? Like there's one there's one pat answer, and there's not. There's multiple answers. There's multiple pathways to get to the destination. So for you, did you have that moment when you were getting into, okay, you decided you wanted to be a filmmaker? Did you have to call your parents and say, hey, folks, I know I got this PhD. Did you have to explain it to anybody in the family and somebody nudging you like, what, are you kidding? What's wrong? Did you receive any of that?
Well, the thing is I lived a double life in a way. And going into London, getting myself a job in London, even if it wasn't maybe as high pressure straight away a job as, people who are really career minded, I was doing what they hoped I would be doing, if you see what I mean. So in a way, when I was doing filmmaking on the side, I was doing enough for them to accept it. They didn't like it necessarily. Here's the thing about my filmmaking. I should give you a bit more background on it. My filmmaking, I had kind of made a few short films in my bedroom for fun. And one of them I put into a competition and it won the competition, which really was unexpected for me. It was someone had encouraged me to enter this competition, and the prize was to go to the Berlin Film Festival to be to get to mingle with other filmmakers from around the world, young filmmakers. This is where I'm talking about me being lucky, but then jumping on the opportunities when they come along. Because I was there and everyone else was really in film school. They said, oh, you're a producer or a director. And I was like, I don't even know what the difference is, things like that. But I made a friend there. I made a friend who was a young filmmaker from Nigeria. And we just really hit it off. So I started going to Nigeria, and my parents had lived there when I was a kid. I had been there before. So I think for them, the moment where they were like, what the hell is going on, is where I told them, yeah, I'm going to Nigeria. I've got my visa. And because their experience of going to Nigeria was always being in this expat bubble. And I was like, yeah, I just met this guy who's Nigerian. We're gonna go and hang out. And so for them, I think that was the thing. That was the biggest source of friction, was not because they didn't like that I was making films. It was that I was going somewhere that they didn't consider to be safe. And that sounds like they're coming with maybe some prejudices, but that is based on them having lived there and having to thought about security. To be completely honest with you, it's a place where security isn't that high. So they're just worried about their kid. As far as they're concerned, I'm still their kid. And I'm just going to see some dude they've never even heard of, and with no particular plan. And, I know that I caused them stress. And I even remember, so yeah, me and my friend in Nigeria, we started a film company in Nigeria. The company still exists. My friend is now one of the biggest directors in Nigeria. We made our first film together. It won lots of awards. It opened the African Film Festival in New York in 2014. So this was something that really went somewhere in a big way, bigger than I ever really expected it to. So it kind of caused tension with my parents because they were worried about my safety. But then as they started seeing stuff actually going somewhere, they were kind of more supportive. And then meanwhile, I had my job with this company, New Energy Finance, that then got acquired by Bloomberg. And I kind of kept it secret from a lot of people there because I didn't want them to think I wasn't serious about my work there. But eventually, as it kind of became impossible to hide because was doing things, they became supportive as well. So it was sort of to your question, what did my parents think? It was hard living a double life at first, but then as on almost on both fronts, it started to go somewhere. I got more and more people saying, hey, this is kind of cool. And yeah, I think that's one thing I would say is, going back to my point, is sometimes you go an unconventional path. I definitely never had a plan to go and become a filmmaker in Nigeria. That's obviously the craziest plan like, who would make that plan if you're unless you're in Nigeria? Of course, if you're in Nigeria, that's a logical plan if you're interested in film. But for me, it was never a plan. But the opportunity came along and I just ran with it. And it really took me to, you can watch my film on Netflix, by the way. I'm not here to promote my movie.
What's the name of the film?
It's called Confucian Nawa.
Confucian?
Yeah, Nawa.
Okay, I'll tell you, that Nigerian, that Nollywood is huge. That Nollywood is that's incredible. And my siblings love those movies. Like if I text my sister now, she'll probably say she saw the movie if it's on Netflix.
The thing is, I mean, this is it, is like about being open to opportunities. A lot of people haven't heard of Nollywood. So when I'm telling them like, oh, yeah, I'm going to Nigeria to like make films, people would just be like, why? And you'd have to say like, no, look, actually, this is the fastest growing film industry in the world. This is like a huge thing. This is not like a lot of people's reaction. And I always found this problematic is they would say, oh, you're going to Nigeria, so you're going to go and like help them make films. And I was like, I literally have no training in making films, right? I literally have no, so what kind of like arrogance would it be to think that just because I'm from the UK, just because I'm a white, they need my help? Because they really do. And I like everything I really learned about the technicalities of making films. I'd made some stuff as an amateur, but doing it professionally, I learned all of that in Nigeria.
Yeah, the funny thing is when I was a kid, I think I'm a little older than you, but I remember as a kid, you know, we get these infomercials, Sally Struthers, and send for 10 cents a day, you can feed, house, and clothe a little Nigerian, kid or whatever. So in the sensibilities of the superpowers, it's all about we have to go there and help them. But their film industry, it might be the largest film industry in the world right now, the most successful film industry in the world.
In terms of volumes of films, I think it is. And the other thing that like made me laugh, was, are you going to go there and encourage them? I was like, trust me, they don't need any encouragement in Nigeria. Like, people don't need any encouragement. Like, the speed at which people work was phenomenal. So inspiring, like, but also just so impressive. I had mentioned during a PhD, like the thing you learn is problem solving.
Right.
I think that prepared me then for filmmaking in Nigeria, because you're constantly problem solving. Like filmmaking, I think you're constantly problem solving anyway. Nigeria is a very unpredictable environment, just little things like the power might go out, and lots of other factors. So you're always having to be thinking in terms of how do we solve this problem? What you're constantly making decisions like this hasn't played out exactly how we planned it. And again, it kind of comes back to the thing is it's good to have a plan, but like me and my friend in Nigeria, this guy called Kenneth Gang, I should stop saying my friend. Me and Kenneth used to joke that a lot of filmmakers would come over to Nigeria from places like the UK or the US to show people how it's done. And the first thing they would do is they'd make a really elaborate plan, they'd have all the shot lists and everything like that. And like that approach didn't work in that environment, because you're not dealing with a situation where everything you planned is going to play out the way you thought it would. And I think that for me was a really important thing to understand and it comes back to this thing. Everyone always tells you have to have a plan, but so often in life, it's not about your plan. It's about how able you are to deal with the unexpected and also jump on opportunities. And again, I think that, filmmaking in Nigeria and the way that my partners there worked was all about having that mind state and that attitude.
Right. Okay. So, you as you tell the story, it sounds like you have pivoted away from the filmmaking now. I
have, somewhat, never officially. My partner actually just shot one of the scripts that I wrote. He just sent me a WhatsApp. And this is what I mean about working fast. This is a script I wrote 10 years ago. It's like, oh yeah, we just filmed it. And we're trying to get distributed. And I was like, wow, like you never fail to amaze me. I think the thing is my filmmaking path took me to Nigeria, and it took me to amazing places. Like I mentioned, our film really at the time made a big impact, more than I ever dreamed of. But I kind of, looking back, I never consciously thought this, but I kind of realized I'd reached an end of a road. It was sort of like, maybe I have nothing more to offer here. Because whatever you do in life, you want to be thinking, where can I continue to grow and have an impact? And we'd got to a point where I was like, all right, well, my role in this is as a screenwriter. And we're in a position where I don't think I would have got there, but the dream would be, I want to be the best screenwriter in Africa. But I'm like, that's not a good dream for me to have. Like, that's a problem if I become that person, right? So I was like, whereas helping my friend get to a position where he could become one of the best directors in Africa, which he's really on that track.
Yeah.
So like, that's something where I was like, maybe like, this is where like, maybe my involvement ramps down a bit. And then on the other hand, the company I was working for, New Energy Finance, had been bought by Bloomberg, had invested hugely. Climate change had really risen up the agenda. And I realized that although I had always considered this job as something I did while I tried to make it work as a filmmaker, again, this is, I would say, luck and like realizing amazing opportunities. I realized that I was actually in a great place to have a positive impact, where there would not come a point where I would have to take my foot off the accelerator or say, actually, am I really the right person to be carrying this forward? Climate change is a lifelong challenge. It's gonna, we're still gonna be working on this after my lifetime. And so I was like, this is something I can really commit myself to and really make a positive difference. So, and I realized I just really enjoyed the job as well. Being a filmmaker is cool. In my current job, I work more with numbers. But I kind of, as I grew older, I had my background in physics, I kind of accept, like, I actually like this. And that might make me a nerd, but that's fine. I'm a nerd. I spent like so much of my life trying to be cool, but I actually just really enjoy this. And working in this field, I'm getting to have a positive impact on this struggle against climate change.
Okay. Now you're a fascinating guy. I could probably talk to you for another hour, but I'm not going to do that. I appreciate your time. I'm gonna narrow down to the last couple of questions. Let's see where we go. So that being said, you mentioned that your company was purchased by Bloomberg. So now you work for Bloomberg. The opportunity comes to go to the States. Is that a phone call you get like, hey, Tom, we bought the company, now we're bringing you here? Or did you see a opportunity up the ladder that you reapplied for? How did that work?
Yeah, it's actually, again, not planned. It's actually because of my girlfriend, who's now my wife. She got a job offer in New York. And so I was like, cool, well, I like my life in London. I love London, the city. I'm enjoying my work at Bloomberg. I guess we'll do a long distance relationship. And so I traveled to her. I traveled to see her. I think it was like Thanksgiving 2019. And one of the things that's nice about Bloomberg is they've got offices all over the world, and they're flexible. So I just said, is it okay if I work from the New York office for a few days? And in fact, they like it because it's good sharing ideas around. So I was in the New York office, and people naturally said, "What are you doing in New York?" And I said, "Oh, my girlfriend's moved to New York, so you might see more of me." And the guy who was who became my boss was like, "Well, we actually kind of need someone to do the job you're doing in London in New York." He didn't say this to me in that conversation, but he kind of called me up later and said, and we've been trying to find someone in New York to do it. We know there's someone who could take over my job in London if I was no longer doing it. So, would you be open to moving to New York? Because I heard that your girlfriend is in New York, so you have a few reasons to want to move to New York. So I moved to New York to be with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. again, my career in this instance was dictated by my relationship more than my my planning, if you see what I mean. But I've loved being in the US, and if we're talking about climate, it's a great time to be in the US. Inflation Reduction Act, huge deal for the battle against climate change in the US. As a country, the US is really beginning to step up where it has in the past. So I was kind of like, I feel like I lucked out again, right place at the right time.
Okay, so I'm gonna tie the girlfriend and the wife into something you said earlier, and let's see if I hit the mark. So you mentioned something about you used to be a dancer. Did you charm your girlfriend because of your amazing dance skills? How did that have anything to do with it?
No, it didn't. No, I mean, so back in London, I joined a dance crew. I'm part of a breakdancing crew in London. This is like the things I get up to. I started dancing, by the way, because I had my double life, working and then making films. And I realized I needed to just do something that wasn't working. So I went to a dance class, and then I became hooked. And I ended up joining a crew in London. But that wasn't what won my wife over. She actually also works for Bloomberg, for a different part of Bloomberg. But we met in the office, and we were friends at work for a long time. But then, outside of work, it went to a different place.
Now you mentioned. Now I'm from the projects in the Bronx.
Yeah.
Where hip hop was created outside my window. Okay.
Yeah.
Where the foundations of hip hop was DJing, MCing, graffiti, and breakdance.
Yeah.
So I noticed you didn't say I joined a dance troupe. You said I joined a dance crew.
Yeah.
That's specific to hip hop.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I sometimes say to people, yeah, no, I'm part of a crew. And then they say, oh, you're part of a dance team. And I'm like, it's not a dance team. And they say, oh, you're part of a dance troupe. And I'm like, you don't understand. I mean, my crew is like a family, and I say that like, oh, it means we're like really tight. That means that like, even the ones who you don't even like that much, you still love them. And that's and we fight a lot. And that was also one of the things that I loved about London, is discovering that group of people and being part of them. And that's one of the things that I miss about being in London, because my crew is back in London. I haven't really been dancing since I got to New York, which is ironic, because as you say, this is where breaking comes from, and I'm not doing very much of it.
I thought you were fascinating. I thought you were fascinating before this topic. I could talk to you for another hour on this topic alone, because I had a breakdance or electric boogie. I wasn't really breaking on the floor, but pop locking and stuff like that. I have some of that in my background. Yeah, absolutely. But long time ago. But if you were from the Bronx, like I was, it was literally happening outside my window. And this was something that we were seeing. I was at the age while it was happening. I was 13, 14 years old. And I'm watching it unfold as the thing that you see while you're walking to school. It wasn't watching on the news type thing. It was your friend, your neighbor, your classmates, your schoolmates. It was like that for us here in the Bronx. And then every place else started seeing it, it started transferring worldwide. But I can go on for another hour with you just on that topic, but I won't.
I'll just say one thing. I absolutely love it. And one of the things I love about it is, you think of hip hop culture, which, as you said, came from the Bronx originally. Very different environments. You talked about I came from a very privileged environment. But what I love about breaking specifically is it's, of all the strands of hip hop culture, it's the one that doesn't involve language, which means it's like really crosses borders. So although it's not big as hip hop music in terms of how much money it generates and the superstars created, as a subculture, it's really, really international. Like you go to a dance event and you meet people from like who travel or from across it. Like, you know, you're in the Netherlands and there's someone from Venezuela and there's someone from Russia. The person from Russia is like, yeah, he just loves hip hop culture. It's so dope. And you're like, and you're like, well, this is something kind of cool. And the fact that, you know, these different regions have developed their own styles within that, like South Korean breaking is something else. It's really, for me, an inspiring art form. You know, it's going to be part of the Olympics.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
The Paris Olympics, they're having breaking.
Wow. Well, just to watch the evolution is incredible. I mean, the guys, the pioneers of breakdancing, the Rocksteady crew. You know, I knew a couple of those guys, but they were a little bit older than me. But they were neighborhood guys for me. So that whole thing, watching how it has expanded to a global, a global phenomenon is unbelievable, right? When you remember how it was when it first started.
Yeah. One of the guys in the Rocksteady crew, Crazy Legs.
Yes.
I'm told that his kid works here at Bloomberg, but I haven't managed to track him down yet. So I'm like, there's hip hop royalty in the building. Just people don't know it.
Well, you know what's funny? Throughout our interview, I sensed humility from you, right? And almost I sensed the air of embarrassed. You sounded, particularly from the beginning of the conversation, you sounded embarrassed by your opportunity or your access or something like that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that, I won't deny it. In a way, like I've had a lot of opportunity in life, but I've also had the opportunity to appreciate that opportunity. And that's because I've become close with so many people who didn't have those same opportunities. I know that there are, when you said, oh, to get into Oxford, you must have been brilliant. And I just think, I know that I worked hard. Don't get me wrong. It didn't just get served to me on a plate. All the opportunities I had, I worked hard. But I also know brilliant people who didn't have a chance in the same way that I did. And so it's not embarrassment. I think it's just like, you have to be humble. You have to realize the good. You have to make the most of the opportunities you get, but also, if you really want to make the world a better place, you should want more people to have those same opportunities, which kind of comes back to what we're here about is mentoring, right?
Yeah.
And actually, this is not just me, it's a company-wide thing. The reason that Bloomberg is doing its work with City Tutors is that we have recognized that the way to have a big impact is to mentor the next generation. And, there's so many different skills within the company. The idea is that we just want to make, we can see that if we can make people aware of the career paths that are available to them, then they can take advantage of that. But I think then that was also perfect for me, coming back to this, what you've picked up on is then learning that we had that. That was why I was like, yeah, I'd love to be involved. But what I would also say, and this comes back to something we were speaking about, maybe even before we started recording, you've got my journey and why maybe I'm sort of a little bit humble about certain things and really keen to mentor, to help people get along. But I think there's a lot of people who have their own version of that story because, we were saying people really do want to mentor. It's not that people want to keep the doors shut in the fancy buildings they're in. They want to show more people how to get into those areas. And yeah, so in my case, Bloomberg's partnership with City Tutors was like having that served to me on a plate. I didn't have to go and find someone who needed help. That was almost like, here are some people who might benefit from your mentoring, and all I had to do was reply to an email.
Right. Well, there's a lot more. I'm finding this out that there's a lot more. But the reason, so when you were talking earlier, and I sensed a little, humility and a little embarrassment or whatever. And embarrassment might be too strong a word, but when I sensed that, I thought it, but I said, I'm not going to bring it up. So the reason I brought it up later is because when you mentioned Crazy Leg's son possibly working for Bloomberg, my thought was, I wonder how he's embracing. Does he know his father is who he was, right? Does he?
I think he must
know?
do.
And would he be like, man, I don't want to talk about that. I want to be my own man. I'm working here at Bloom. How would he receive it? That's what made me bring it up when I brought it up just now.
Yeah, that's interesting. The only reason I know about this, by the way, is that I think Crazy Legs put it on his Instagram. And so then lots of my friends were messaging me. And what I thought was interesting about it is like, I work at Bloomberg. That's like a normal part of my day. And so it is an amazing place to work, but it's also just my daily routine. And there was Crazy Legs being like, I'm like so proud of my son, what he's done. He's such a smart, he's working at Bloomberg. And I was like, but you're Crazy Legs. You're like a hip hop god. Like, and you're talking about like how incredible it is that your son is doing the thing that I'm doing. And it gives you a bit of a sense of perspective, that there are many different ways you can live an amazing life. And you might look across at someone and say what they're doing is amazing, but you don't realize they might be looking back at you and saying the same thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that final question, this is my final question to you. And mind you, we still have a lot of things that I could unpack, but yeah. I'm gonna take us here because I appreciate your time and I'm not gonna hold you hostage. Final question. We've talked about a lot of things, probably things you didn't expect to speak about, but what did we leave out?
What did we leave out? I guess I'd like to leave out about me or just mentoring or
whatever's crossed your mind, whatever came to mind when I asked the question.
I mean, one of the things because I was thinking about beforehand, what I've gained from being part of City Tutors and what I feel like I can offer as a mentor. And maybe this comes back to, why it's important to have humility. I think when you think you'll take on a mentee, people dream that it's going to be like something out of the movies where you're like some like inspiring, wise person that your mentee looks up to, and then they'll go and do amazing things and thank you when they make their big speech at the end. The reality is that people come and they are kind of like what you're saying. They're not really sure what to do. They have some ideas that they want to explore. And I realize that a lot of the time I don't have the answer for them. I don't know what to tell them. But what I do know is, and this is where I think a mentor can really help, I can send them to the person who does know the answer. It's so many times my mentees, and I was talking to someone else who's been mentoring as well. They said it's the same thing with them, is that they're not all knowing, but what they do have is a network of people. And I think a lot of, what I would say to young people listening to this, thinking about, they're not sure how to proceed with their career. I think I've said repeatedly, you don't have to have a plan, but you have to be open to opportunity. I would also say just build a network. And a network is not about, someone, so they're going to get you a job. It's not really, that's not how it is. It's more like the strength of your network is, who to go to for certain things, the answer to certain questions and things like that. And for me as a mentor, I've realized that's the best thing I can do is share my network with people, just people who I've got a friendly relationship with professionally, who I know will have good answers for this person, pass them along. So if anyone is listening and you ever get mentored by me and I set you up with someone else, it's not because I'm trying to fob you off. It's because that's me trying to be a good mentor.
Absolutely, because it's not just about having the network. It's about knowing how to successfully use the network, utilize the network.
Yeah,
that's an important strategy, right? Knowing just because they're your mentor, don't expect them to give you a job or get you a job or whatever. Like I know I'm 3 degrees of separation from Crazy Legs, right? I grew up in my Haven projects. He grew up somewhere around Forest Houses where my cousins where my cousins grew up. So I could probably get to Crazy Legs in in a couple of phone calls, right?
Yeah.
So a guy like that, he, coming from the Bronx, we come from a similar existence, and we both found some success. And I'm a rapper, by the way. I came up as an MC in hip hop,
Okay.
right? So I'm one of those guys. I used to have like 3 or 4 composition notebooks filled with rhymes.
Right.
You give me a microphone and put a beat under it, and I could rhyme for 3 hours, right? So that was my coming up in hip hop. But it's about we make these kids. We make these kids, and our kids are our greatest accomplishment, our greatest investment, and I'm sure that I can relate to how proud he is of his son, who works at a place like Bloomberg, because I have a daughter. I have a couple of daughters. One is young now, but my 28-year-old, she makes me so proud. Everything she does, and she, her and I'm her father, but we're dear friends, and we're real close. So, watching you, I can imagine how proud your parents must be of you. Did you give your parents any grandkids yet? Is that in the conversation?
No, I didn't. I not yet. Work in progress.
Yes. But yeah, man. So I noticed you were tying in the city tutors and the men. My interviews don't have to make sense, right? I don't have to tie in. I don't have to tie in mentorship and tutoring to the conversation, because it is about you, but it is about some of the jewels you dropped and the amazing journey. Very impressive. Breakdancing. I was waiting for you to say, and you know what? You can see me breakdancing in the background of a video that Beyonce made that's on Amazon Prime. I was waiting for you to say something.
No, the thing about the dancing, I mean, I say I'm part of a dance crew, right? This is one of the things in crew culture, is it's all about like strength in numbers and basking in the glory of your peers. I am not the best dancer. Like, to people who don't dance, like, I'm probably impressive, but given the amount of time I put in, I'm not that good. But I'm in my crew because they like me and they think I'm a nice guy. So you won't find me in the background of the Beyonce video, but I will tell you, I can list off artists that people in my crew have danced videos, danced for, and I bask in their reflected glory.
Let me tell you something, man. How many PhDs do you think are in breakdance crews at any time in the world? How many can you think of?
I don't know.
I'll give you the answer right now. It's 0.
There is a guy.
You're the only one.
There is a b-boy in the UK who's a dentist, and he mentions it at every possible opportunity. And it's like behind his back, it's like, oh my God, here he goes again. He's a dentist. We get it.
You two should team up. You two should team up.
No, because I see him being like that. I'm like, I'm definitely not bringing up my PhD.
You two team up and call yourself Les PhDs, right? And y'all could tour all over the world. That would be incredible.
Yeah, maybe.
And then you make a film about it and put it in Hey, listen, man. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting you. Your name sounds like a character in a James Bond movie. I'm gonna tell you right now, or the Crown or something like that. So you're really in vogue right now, right? You're really popping right now. Your wife is lucky she locked you down before.
I'll tell her that.
Yes. and I'm sure she's a dime piece. I'm sure she's incredible. But yeah, you're a very impressive gentleman, and I definitely appreciate your time. And thank you for your contribution to City Tutors, and your great work you're doing over there at Bloomberg.